The story of Kashmir's rise begins around 3rd century BC, under the Mauryan Empire. After embracing Buddhism, Emperor Ashok sent monks and teachers across India. Some of them came to Kashmir. Here they built the first stupas and monasteries. Buddhism didn't spread through power. It spread through peace, through teachings, not war. By the 1st century CE, Kashmir came under the rule of Kushan Empire. One of their greatest kings was Kanishka, a strong supporter of both Buddhism and Hinduism. In Kashmir, this created a beautiful balance. Monks and sages debated in mountain caves. Temples and monasteries stood side by side. People didn't fight over religion. They learned from it. Kashmir was not divided by faith. In fact, faith brought it closer together. But something deeper was beginning to grow. Between the 4th and the 6th centuries, Kashmir was ruled by Gonanda dynasty. According to the ancient book Raj Tarangani, their family line goes all the way back to the time of Mahabharata, though modern historians believe this was a later branch of that royal line. These kings weren't focused on expanding their empire. They focused on thought, on knowledge. And during this time, a powerful new spiritual idea was born: Kashmir Shaivism. It was different from other beliefs. It didn't see God as far away. It said that the whole universe itself is divine, including us, and that freedom doesn't come from running away from life. It comes from truly understanding it. This was not just religion. It was a way of seeing, a way of being. And just like every great thought needs a place to grow, Kashmir needed a center of learning. This place was called Sharada Peeth. It was more than just a temple. It was one of the oldest universities in the world, possibly built during the later Gonanda or early Karkota period. Students came here from all over India, Tibet, and Central Asia to learn about logic, mathematics, language, and philosophy. The goddess Sharda, a form of Saraswati, the goddess of knowledge, was worshipped here. And the Sharda script, once used to write Sanskrit in Kashmir, still carries her name. This was the time when Kashmir truly became land of seekers. By the 7th century, a powerful new dynasty rose, the Karkotas. The first ruler, Durlabvardhan, brought peace and stability. But the one who changed everything was his descendant, Lalitaditya Muktapida. According to Raj Tirangani, his kingdom stretched from Bengal to Central Asia. He wasn't just a warrior, he was a builder. He built the famous Martand Sun Temple, one of the most stunning temples of its time. It was made of stone with high pillars and open courtyards, built to honor the power of sun. Under the Karkota, Kashmir became more than just a spiritual land. It became a center of art, literature, architecture, and culture. This was Kashmir's golden age. After the Karkotas, power slowly shifted to a new dynasty, the Uttapalas. And in the 9th century, a wise and visionary king took the throne, Avantivarman. He wasn't famous for battles. He was famous for revival. Avantivarman drained swamps, repaired canals, and brought back farming to the area that had been abandoned. He even founded a new city, Avantipur, near today's Srinagar. But his biggest legacy was his culture and faith. He restored temples, including the beautiful Avanti Swami temple, built in stone with fine carvings dedicated to Vishnu. During his reign, the valley remained peaceful. Hinduism grew strong, but Buddhism still survived. Both faiths coexisted just like they had for centuries. And then came the 10th century, not a time of war, but of wisdom. This was the peak of Kashmir's spiritual and intellectual life. At the heart of it was one man, Abhinav Gupta. He was more than just philosopher. He was a poet, a saint, a teacher. He wrote about aesthetics, devotion, music, consciousness, and taught that even daily life, even love, even pain could lead you to the divine if you truly understood it. He lived during the time of Queen Dida, one of Kashmir's most powerful female ruler. While she held the kingdom with strength and strategy, Abhinav Gupta guided its soul. This was the last great flame of ancient Kashmir, before the winds began to change. But no light lasts forever. After Queen Dida's reign, the kingdom grew weaker. Local rulers fought for power. Corruption spread. And slowly, the door opened for change. That change came in the 14th century. Not through war, but through a man seeking shelter. His name was Rinchen, a Buddhist prince from Ladakh. He lost his kingdom and came to Kashmir as a refugee. The king welcomed him, and in time, Rinchen rose to power. He married the Hindu queen Kota Rani and became the ruler of Kashmir. Later, he converted to Islam, guided by a Sufi saint named Bulbul Shah. This made Rinchen the first Muslim king of Kashmir. But his rule didn't last long. After his death, Queen Kota Rani tried to protect the throne. She appointed a wise Hindu minister named Bharat. But power had already shifted. A man named Shamir, once a soldier under Rinchen, saw his chance. He gained support quietly, and finally, he took the throne. Some say he forced Kota Rani to marry him. Others says she took her own life to protect her dignity. Either way, the throne of Kashmir, for the first time in history, passed fully into Islamic hands. This began the Shah Mir dynasty, and the valley entered a new chapter. At first, this change wasn't violent. The early Shah Mir rulers allowed some Hindu traditions to survive. Temples still stood. Pandits still taught. Faith still lived side by side. By the late 14th century, a new ruler ascended the throne. History remembers him as Sikandar Butshikan, the breaker of idols. Under his rule, many Hindu temples were destroyed. The great Sharada Peeth was shut down. Sanskrit schools were closed. Hindu festivals were banned. And forced conversion began. Many Kashmiri Pandits left. Some fled to other parts of India. Some stayed, hoping it would pass. But the Kashmir they knew was gone. This wasn't just a political change. It was the start of a civilizational shift. The land of mantras now echoed with silence. The fire altars were cold. The gods had no homes. And the seekers had no temples to return. But still, Kashmiri's soul didn't die. It lived on in memory, in stories whispered by elders, in the families who left but carried their homeland in their hearts, in the ruins that still stood as if waiting to be remembered. Because a civilization can lose its king, it can lose its temple, but if its story survives, it's never truly gone. Kashmir had fallen, temples were shattered, manuscripts were burned. The valley's voice, once soft with wisdom, had been silenced by fire and fear. But history never ends in silence, because in the centuries that followed, new voices would rise from outside the valley to speak for those who had none. The first to arrive was a traveler, a seeker, Guru Nanak Dev Ji, the first guru of the Sikhs. He walked through the mountains of Kashmir during his spiritual journeys. He spoke with sages, with Sufis, with ordinary people. And everywhere he went, he shared one message. The truth is the highest. But higher still is living that truth. Where fear had settled, he brought courage. Where identities were erased, he reminded people who they were. Later, Guru Har Gobind Sahib Ji, the sixth Guru, also visited Kashmir. His message was clear. Wear the sword, not for conquest, but for protection. And it would not be forgotten. But the most defining moment came in 1675. A group of Kashmiri Pandits, facing forced conversion under Mughal rule, crossed icy passes to reach Anandpur Sahib. They came not with weapons, but with tears. They came not to fight, but to beg for their right to live, as they were. They stood before Guru Tegh Bahadur Ji, the ninth Guru of the Sikhs, and asked, "Who will stand for us?" He didn't answer with speeches. He didn't rally an army. He simply said, "If you want to destroy the Dharma of the Hind, you must first go through me." The Mughal court gave him a choice: convert or die. He chose death. He was beheaded in Delhi. He didn't die for religion. He died for the freedom to believe. He gave his life not for the power or pride, but for principle. Even today, his sacrifice stands as one of the most selfless acts in human history. Not just in Sikhism, not just in Hinduism, but in the history of freedom itself. Time moved forward. Kashmir came under Afghan rule, harsh and cruel. The valley suffered again. But in 1819, the winds changed once more. The Sikh Empire, led by Maharaja Ranjit Singh, sent its army into Kashmir. The Afghans were defeated, and for the first time in centuries, the violence stopped. The Sikhs ruled Kashmir for nearly 30 years. They brought peace, built roads, and gave Hindus and Muslims a chance to breathe again. Then came 1846, another turning point. In 1846, after the First Anglo-Sikh War, the British East India Company signed a Treaty of Amritsar. For 75 lakh rupees, worth thousands of crores today, they sold Kashmir to a trusted Dogra general, Gulab Singh, a Dogra Rajput, and so the Dogra dynasty began. A Hindu king once loyal to Ranjit Singh now became Maharaj of Jammu and Kashmir. Under the Dogra dynasty, Hindu rule returned to the valley after nearly 500 years. Temples were restored, land was reclaimed, ancient texts were rewritten from memory. The flame, once reduced to ashes, was lit again. But this was not the return of war, it was return of memory. And in those years, between Sikh swords and Dogra crowns, something remarkable happened. For the first time in centuries, Hindus and Muslims began to live side by side again, not as rulers and subjects, but as neighbors. They celebrated each other's festivals. They shared food, poetry, music. They built something greater than religion. They built Kashmir, a shared way of life that belonged to everyone. For a moment in history, Kashmir remembered who it was. It wasn't perfect, but for a time, it was whole. Until 1947. When partition came, it didn't just break India. It broke the spine of Kashmir once again. And that is where our final chapter begins. 1947. India was free, but Kashmir was not. At that time, Kashmir was still ruled by a Hindu king, Maharaja Hari Singh. He didn't want to join India. He didn't want to join Pakistan. He wanted Kashmir to stay independent. But both India and Pakistan were watching. And Pakistan decided not to wait. In October 1947, Pakistan launched Operation Gulmarg. Thousands of tribal fighters, trained and sent by Pakistan, invaded Kashmir. They attacked villages. They killed civilians. They looted and burned homes. They reached just 20 miles from Srinagar. Hari Singh had no choice. He called India for help. He asked India for help. But Nehru delayed. Some say he hesitated because of Kashmir's Muslim population. Some say he waited for Hari Singh to officially sign the instrument of accession. By the time Indian government approved military action, 2/3 of Kashmir had already been overrun. Indian troops were airlifted to Srinagar on October 27, 1947, just in time to stop the invaders at the city's doorstep. But the damage was done. Before the Indian army could take back all of Kashmir, the war was stopped. Nehru made a mistake that haunts history. Instead of completing the operation, Nehru took the matter to United Nations. And in 1949, under international pressure, a ceasefire was declared. The result, India lost one third of Kashmir, now known as Pakistan oppressed Kashmir. What could have been one state was now split forever. Not by culture, not by language, but by politics and war. To calm the region, India gave Kashmir a special status in the constitution. It was called Article 370. It allowed Kashmir to have its own laws, its own flag, and control over everything except defense, foreign affairs, and communications. It meant to protect Kashmir's identity. But over time, it created confusion, isolation, and mistrust. For a few decades, Kashmir tried to move forward. There were elections, some peace, some hope, but behind the scenes, another storm was rising. In the 1980s, something dangerous started happening. Militants trained in Pakistan entered the valley. They carried guns. They spread fear. They didn't want peace. They wanted Kashmir to break away from India and become part of Pakistan. Their first target, the Kashmiri Pandits, the original residents of the valley. In 1990, it began. Loudspeakers from mosques started blaring threats. Ralev, Galev ya Chalev. Convert, die or leave. Militants killed Pandits in streets. Posters were pasted on doors. Women were threatened. Men were dragged out and shot. Temples were destroyed. Homes were looted. No one came to help. More than 400,000 Kashmiri Pandits had to leave their homes overnight. They fled to Jammu, Delhi, and refugee camps. They left behind everything: lands, photos, memories, even the ashes of their ancestors. They had lived there for thousands of years, and now they were refugees in their own country. India watched. The world stayed silent. And Kashmir, once a land of debate, prayers, and learning, became a land of fear, blood, and silence. The Pandits never got justice, even till today. They never got their homes back. Their temples still lie in ruins. Their memories are all that remain. The story doesn't end here, but this was the deepest wound. Because in that moment, Kashmir forgot who it was. And when a land forgets its own people, it loses more than just a war. It loses its soul. Kashmir still stands. The rivers still flow. The snow still falls. The mountains still watch. But something is missing. Not just land, not just peace, but memory. Children in the valley today walk past ruins, but don't know what they were. They see broken stones, not temples. They hear silence, but not the stories behind it. Ask them about Sharada Peeth, and they'll shake their head. Ask them about Lalitaditya or Abhinav Gupta. They'll say never heard of them. Even the Kashmiri Pandits, many now living across India and abroad, cannot show their children where their grandparents lived because the houses are gone. The name on the doors erased. Even the graveyards have no marker. But memory is strange. It doesn't need buildings. It lives in words, in stories, in silence. And across India, in refugee colony, in living rooms, in worn out diaries, Kashmir still lives. In the eyes of the mother who still dreams of her old home. In the hands of a father who holds key to a house that no longer exists. In the voice of a child asking, why did we have to leave?